Hey there, my name is James Kalin. I am the less prolific half of the KMA, and my 1002nd album is For Him and the Girls by Hawksley Workman.
Hi, I'm Jeff Stephen, and you're listening to the 1002nd Album Podcast. I spent 10 years going through the 1001 albums you must hear before you die, and now I'm asking people that are important to me all about the albums that are important to them. Enjoy! This is the 1002nd Album Podcast. I'm Jeff Stephen, and I'm particularly excited for today's show, as today we have our first guest from the province of Saskatchewan. He was a perennial top 10 contender in the Artist of the Week quizzes and is also the writer of many fantastic concert reviews. Please welcome James Kalin.
Great, thanks, Toby. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for coming.
As I mess up the first sentence I say, so we got that out of the way, so we're good to go now.
Exactly. Well, that makes the podcast real. It's happening, which is good. And the album of choice is Hawksley Workman, For Him and the Girls. And my first question for you would be, where and when did you first encounter Hawksley Workman?
So I first encountered Hawksley right after this album came out. There's a girl I was dating at the time. It's a distance thing. I lived in Saskatoon. She lived in Winnipeg. And the first time I went to go visit her, she put this album on. I'd never heard the album before. I'd never heard of Hawksley Workman before. She puts this thing on, and I hated it. It was just weird and different and dumb and, different and weird is bad and scary. But I don't want to say anything, right? I'm trying to be nice. So she puts this album on, listen to it. And the weirdest thing was after I left, I could not get these songs out of my head. So then after that, the next time I went to see her, she says, I'm going to put on some music. You got anything you want? I'm like, yeah, put that Hawksley album on again from last time. So she did. And next time she comes to see me, and I'm like, you want to bring that album? I want to copy it. So I did. And then eventually I listened to the copy way too many times and thought, okay, this is abusing the system here. I really should go buy one of my own. And I did. And the rest is basically history. I was actually talking to her just this past week because I had always thought she had gone to see somebody else and Hawksley was the opener, and that's how she heard about him. So I was trying to, out of curiosity, wondering who it was. And she said no, that she had just seen a poster for the show, had never heard of this guy, and was like, all right, I'll go to this. So it's kind of funny how, this one, little decision on her part really just, changed my musical tastes so much, that we're talking about this almost 25 years later.
Yeah, and I love those, the sliding doors phenomenon where if they hadn't seen that poster, do they then share the music, which is it's just brilliant.
Yeah, exactly.
And I love those albums too, where the first experience is, in this case, almost overwhelmingly negative as well, but then it turns into a huge positive down the road, which is a neat conversion in that sense.
And that's happened with a couple of friends of mine that I introduced the album to back then, because I would give them a copy of it and I would say, listen to this. The first time you'll hate it and you'll wonder why I ever gave it to you. And then listen to it a second time and you'll get it. And it worked.
Yeah. So I guess maybe going in with the managed expectations that it's not going to be instant appeal, but there's going to be a real if you put in the time and effort, it's going to be well worth your while. And this one, exactly. I'm glad you chose this one too, because it's his debut album, and it's not exactly like he's been idle since 1999 either. How does this one compare to the rest of his catalog?
I think it's a really good starting point. Like I mentioned, there is a lot of, let's go with eccentricity on this album, but there's also, you get a song like Safe and Sound is as straightforward a song as he's ever put out, just a very simple little love song. Over time, I think he's become a lot less theatrical and a lot less performative. The first shows, he'd come out, he'd be wearing a feather boa, he'd strip down to his underwear. I get very excited because we wore the same brand. He had these two wooden sticks and he'd stomp them around on the stage for percussion, and he'd tell these ludicrous stories. I know one of his early origin stories that he would tell was how he worked at a tap dancing school and lived in a closet at the tap dancing school, and that's how he got his start in music, was that he would work as a janitor, and then he'd have the place to himself at night, so he'd write music and he'd perform with the tap dancing students. You always kind of had to take everything with a little bit of grain of salt. It was more about the story than maybe what actually happened. Back then, like Hawksley Workman is a stage name, and back then he would not address that, and now he's very open about what his real name is. I'm not going to break kayfabe here; it's out there if you want to look for it. But
that's great, and it wasn't clear what was fiction and what was the actual backstory.
Exactly, exactly. If it made for a good story, he was going with it. He's still very much a storyteller now when you go see him in concert, but I think they're based a little more on reality.
Nice. And one thing that I gather is nonfiction is that he did do most of the stuff on this album, and I've always really had a soft spot for those artists that sort of do it all themselves. And that is, I think, if we were to do fiction, nonfiction, that is nonfiction, that he did play most of the stuff here, right?
Yeah, that's correct. Really, he considers himself a drummer first and foremost. That the drums were his first instrument. I've seen him. He did a talk here in Regina. Just about drumming, and had a big drum kit set up and would drum along to, there were different songs, and talk about his style of drumming. I know you had a guest on your show who mentioned Serena Ryder as the 1,000-second album. I actually saw Hawksley on tour with her. He was touring as her drummer and produced one of her albums as well.
So if he considers himself a drummer first and foremost, is when he plays live, does he play any songs behind the kit, or does he sort of move around a little?
Well, I've seen him 27 times now in many various incarnations. A lot of the time it'll be just him and a guitar, or it'll be him and Todd Lumley, or Mr. Lonely as he's known, who's the keyboard player. It'll be just the two of them. When there is a full band, yeah, he will sometimes take a turn behind the drums, switch out, but mostly when you see him live, he's playing guitar.
And fewer feather boas than there were at one point in time.
Yeah, not a lot of feather boas these days. Like I said, a lot less theatrical. But yeah, no, I've seen him in those kinds of configurations. Seen him with the full band. Saw him with the Calgary Symphony, so that was really cool. Or the Art of Time Ensemble. They do shows in Toronto. It was him and I think Art of Time Ensemble, I want to say, is like a 6-piece sort of classical ensemble, and they did the entire night was all Bruce Cockburn covers. So if you're looking for an influence, I don't know that you necessarily would hear this album and think Bruce Cockburn, but that's very much one of his big influences.
Okay, and there's somebody whose storytelling was paramount in his recordings for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And I can appreciate that if you see him live 27 times, it sounds like no two shows are ever the same either. Like if it's the lineup's different, the feel is different, the songs performed are different.
Yeah, it really depends on the group he's got going. Because when he has a new album out and does a full band tour, that's when he digs through the back catalog and the deep cuts and the B-sides. And I saw one show where I don't think he played any of the singles or any of the crowd favorites, and I left and I went, that show was amazing, and I'm not sure who it was for. Like, I think it was for me, maybe exclusively. So I really enjoyed that one. For a lot of the shows where it's just him, he has, for a guy who has about 15 or so albums out, he really seems to have about 30 songs that are his go-tos, and generally he'll pick a lot from that pile. And then when he has the full band, he branches out a lot more. He has said that he has, even with songs, that he's been playing for 20 years, he does have trouble remembering the lyrics in concert. So I think that's why he when it's just him, sticks to like a smaller batch of songs.
I remember seeing Billy Joel being interviewed, and he said he looks into the crowd for the lyrics to "We Didn't Start the Fires." Like if I can't get that first line, I'm toast on the rest of it. He, like Hawksley has been doing it for decades, but yeah, it's still, when there's so many songs, I guess it's tough to hold it all.
Oh, for sure.
Nice. And I like that point about being unclear who the target audience was too, because when listening to this album, it's delightfully, as you said, eccentric too, where it's unclear what the genre is, how you'd categorize it. But I'd say there's no shortage of standouts though. And are there certain points of this album that jump off the running order at you?
I mean, Safe and Sound is tremendous. That one, probably at least 20 out of those 27 shows he's played it at, that is a crowd favorite. He has made kind of, he'll make little self-deprecating comments about, stuff that he's written a long time ago. Safe and Sound has the one line, "We fit together like the ignition and the key." And when he plays it live, he'll do this little wink and say, "If you know what I mean," just kind of hinting like, yes, it's not a particularly subtle metaphor that we're going for here. But that one's just a very, very sweet, very nice song. Bullets is a personal favorite. Hawksley talks about being very close to his grandparents, and the song Bullets was about for his grandfather and his experiences in the war. So that one I particularly like. One of the friends I introduced to Hawksley's music, probably her favorite song ever is Baby This Night. So we'll have to mention that one every time he comes to town. She's on Twitter being like, "You gonna play it this time?" And he has for her, so that's very kind.
Nice.
And just in listening to this album a couple times over this past week to get ready for this, I found it was very much like that initial time where I'll listen to it and then just some random song will get stuck in my head. The song All of This Kids I've had in my head for probably the last 3 or 4 days. It's not one that I would ever have, before this week would have pointed to and say, "Oh, this is the standout song in the album," but boy, has it stuck with me.
Yeah. And it's I wrote down the track list and scribbled some thoughts about some of them. And the one since yesterday afternoon, the one I've had in my head is the "Stop Joking Around" with the lovely banjo part in that has been just going over and over, which is again not complaining at all because it's a lovely tune.
Yeah, that's another one of those ones where it starts off, you're kind of like, "Hey, what am I getting into?" And then it really just turns into just a very sweet song, like just very, very pretty song. One thing I do have here, I'll show you this is for an audio only medium. I'll show you this. So there's, if you remember the band Art Brut, had Emily Kane was one of their big songs, or formed a band. Anyways, in the 90s, no, probably mid 2000s. Anyway, the lead singer, what he will do is he will paint the cover of your favorite album for you. So you send in the request, he will paint it while listening to the album and then send you a review of it. So
okay,
I've got that little painted album cover here. And yeah, so it was interesting hearing his thoughts on it, because the two artists that he compared it to was the Divine Comedy. And he said that he had heard the album back when it was new and hadn't heard it for a long time. And he said that hearing it now, he hears a lot of Harry Nilsson's influence as well. Okay. And said that it was interesting to him because, 20 years ago, that would never have crossed his mind. And now it stands out a lot for him.
Yeah.
So I just thought that was neat to get that take on it.
And I like that idea of the art too being created while listening and reflecting. That's really neat. And I'm glad you mentioned the Divine Comedy, because especially on that first side with what's it called, Sad House Daddy and Tarantula, it felt like a cabaret, essentially, like it would be performed with an audience of people and just very over the top. Yeah, but lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Tarantula in particular is another one of the standout songs for me.
Yeah, nice. But also with the "Stop Joking Around," where there was that falsetto at the top, where it was sort of unclear what we were signing up for. I had that same reaction right from the first track, "Maniacs," where it launches in with that "eo eo eo," like just where it's
almost a yodeling kind of thing at the start, and
yeah, which definitely got my attention right off the top. It's like, okay, there's something this I have not heard before, so something I was keen to hear more.
And then talking about like the friends I introduced the music to way back in the day, you give them the CD and that's the first thing they hear, and they're just, what? It catches you right off guard, and then it kind of takes you all over the place. But
yeah. Yeah, I like it. And and then a song like you mentioned, Bullets as well.
Mhm.
The tune that I had in my I had a sort of a comparable was Hot Hot Heat. One of their tunes. What's it's the last song on the first side of Make Up the Breakdown. I think it's called Oh God Damn It, where it's just like
Oh yeah, okay.
it had a similar vibe and in a very favorable way. But having that association, I was again, no complaints.
And of course, Hawksley, one of his side projects is with Steve Bays from Hot Hot Heat
Yes.
and Ryan Dahl, who's in Limblifter and Age of Electric, a side project called Mounties. To be clear, because my uncle thought that Hawksley Workman was a Mountie at one point, like, no, that's just what the band was called. He is not an ex-cop.
Was never part of the RCMP at any point.
To the best of my knowledge, that probably is a story he would have come up with in the early days, but I don't think he'll try that now.
Yeah, if he hadn't been at the tap dancing school, that might have been another possible path he'd taken. So,
Exactly, yeah.
and overall, I guess my question for you would be, of his whole catalog or of all the options, what is it about For Him and the Girls that would be the 1,000-second album that one must hear?
For me, I think it's artistically challenging, but not overly so. Like I said, if you've never heard his music, or if you're only familiar with his new stuff, which is can be a lot simpler, a lot more nostalgic. I think there's a lot of his songs about sort of looking back at his childhood, his youth now. If you're only familiar with those, this is going to be pretty weird, but I think it really pays off if you get into it, you stick with it. I think it's an excellent introduction point. I mean, really, he's one of the most prolific Canadian musicians of the last 25 years. Like I said, 15 albums out, and I really lucked out personally because I mean, obviously I'm a fan, but I can't think of anybody apart from local people who tour here more and play here more. So that's really worked out. And really obviously the most important reason this should be the 1,000-second album is I clearly have impeccable taste. And if I say it is, then it is. And if I say you should listen to it, you should. I think that's really pretty straightforward. I don't think I should even have had to say that.
Nice. And you haven't steered me wrong yet. So, I decided that we watched Mary Poppins with the kids the other day, and she had a great line where she said, "Let me be clear, I never explain anything." And so whatever Mary Poppins said goes. So whatever James says with music recommendations, just it goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And yeah, like you said, he's been beyond prolific. And I noticed he's got a bunch of producer credits as well. Does he sort of have a signature production sound too?
Not that I've really noticed. He's worked with a bunch of different artists. He's like Serena Ryder, like I said. He produced a Tegan and Sarah album. I know there's a new artist, Sky Wallace, who just had a new album out, and she's been working with him on some stuff. But he's producing and performing. He's really become, you talk about the first album being very DIY. He's become much more collaborative. He's got the Mountie stuff. He's got digital EPs, EP of duets with Sarah Slean, an instrumental EP with Kevin Bright, an EP band called Tommy Hawkins with Thomas Darcy. So yeah, I think he's really, one of the ways that his music has changed is he's much more collaborative now, more into working with other artists, and then like yeah, lots of producer credits as well.
And do you think is it clear where he may go next with his career?
You never know, because like I said, this album, the most recent one, Less Rage, More Tears, and the one before it, Median Age Wasteland, there's a lot of looking back, a lot of nostalgia. The album before that, Old Cheetah, I would put as stranger and more eclectic, more eccentric than For Him and the Girls. It really is just going to be whatever strikes his fancy at the time. He's got a play that he wrote, The God That Comes. I've seen that. So you never know. Like the next album could be very simple and stripped down, or he might just go off in some completely unexpected direction.
But I'm keen to hear whatever it may be. I'm keen to hear, and I look forward to one day seeing him live too, because especially you mentioned a song like "Safe and Sound" feels like it would be a really nice audience moment as well, with people joining him for some of those lyrics too.
It is. That one is a particularly good sing along. when they do it live and it's him and Mr. Lonely, the little instrumental break in the middle, Mr. Lonely turns into this sort of almost like a honky tonk piano kind of bit. Like it's really fun live. When it's just Hawksley, he will have the crowd whistle that part instead. It turns out if you try to get a crowd to whistle, they cannot do it together. They cannot do it in tune. It is a disaster of the most entertaining proportions.
So they may not be precise, but they'll whistle.
Not precise. The heart is in the right place. Yeah. The whistling is the heart is in the right place. Let's just leave it with that.
And that's all we can ask for. I like it.
Exactly.
Nice. Well, a huge thank you, James, for coming today, and until the next time.
Glad to be here. This was a lot of fun.
Take care.
This has been the 1000 Second Album Podcast. Thanks for sharing some of your time, energy, and attention with us today. Take care.